Jack Wilkinson. It's so great to see you. I've known you since you were like 2 feet shorter. You came into my class in 8th grade and you had a Rush t-shirt on. I think you spent the whole first month of my class just drumming on the desk and not wanting to do a single thing.
That sounds right.
You're someone I've always looked up to because you've taken a different path. It's just been really cool to watch your progression and how you've been able to mix the creativity with being productive. What was it like coming up with this creative brain of yours, trying to sit in like a typical public school?
I knew I had something different going on compared to every other kid. Like, for the most part, I knew that from a social perspective, I was a little differently wired.
And so were a lot of us, right? And that's the gift eventually, but that's not easy in school. When did you notice that you were differently wired?
Probably around kindergarten, first grade. Anytime that there was anything involving like simple math problems or something like that, that was always a huge ordeal for me because concentration was very tough, specifically in my younger years. So, you look around, you see your classmates not have these problems and you realize, oh, okay, I think I got something else going on.
That's a great way to put it. You look around, everyone's done with the addition worksheet or whatever in first grade, and you're like, I'm on problem 2. That's your gift now, is that you think differently. Like I've seen your short films and your music's incredible, right? But back then, was there ever a time where you look back at your younger life, you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm not like everyone else?
Yeah, most of my middle school career was like that. Things got better as I met more people from different areas, but I definitely noticed all throughout the later years of elementary and most of middle school that I progressed towards things that most kids just didn't find interesting like I did. I mean, music, but also I was very good at like memorizing random statistics, specifically in the sports world. When I was younger, I was really, really into football and all that. I think at one point I memorized all the Super Bowl scores.
I actually remember that story. And so, someone said something like, are you going to play football at school? And you said something like, did you know that Super Bowl 25 the score was? And it was just, I'm sure it felt different.
Yeah, no, it was definitely different. But, you adapt as time goes on. So it works out in your favor in the long run.
It does, if you're patient enough to get there and you put in the work. Because the challenge is the gift if you put in the work. You noticed it way earlier than me. That was probably so out of control. But like I remember being in grad school. I was in like a mental health, becoming a therapist, counselor type of class with my school psychology degree. And everyone was talking about, kind of what they were going to do with it, whether they were going to go the school psychology or a different route. I raised my hand, something along the lines of, I'm going to have an office with a football field in it. And everyone's like, what's this guy talking about? Like no one could follow the quickness of my thoughts. I achieved that goal, but at the time you look around and you're like, why is no one else thinking this? You first think it's other people, but then you realize I'm probably the odd one out here.
Yeah, it's not the best feeling.
Do you feel like with something that you're interested in, music and film are your things, do you feel like you're a pretty quick learner?
If it's something I'm focused on, absolutely. If it's something I have no interest in at all, I am terrible at it.
Well, I would argue that you're terrible. I would just say if you're not interested, you just don't really want to engage.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah, because my experience from you as an 8th grade teacher was you were so good at what you were interested in, and you couldn't have cared less about what you weren't. And that drove adults in your life crazy because you had like A's in like 2 classes and you just wouldn't turn your work in other classes.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where that started. I just knew that somewhere in my brain, the amount of interest also included the amount of priority something had. And for me, interest and priority were very similar. They were very linked together. And it took me years to kind of break those two apart and realize that those are different categories where priorities take up what needs to be done versus what you want. I didn't separate those two categories probably until my college years. Even with parents yelling at me in middle school and high school, it just didn't click in for me until probably about sophomore year in college.
But that's a typical ADHD story. It's that hyper-focus thing.
Yeah.
It's twice as hard for us to engage in things we're not interested in. And then we hyper-focus and get really good at what we are interested in.
Yeah.
And that's also the gift when you get older, right? Real life rewards you for being very good at one thing. School rewards you for being decent to pretty good at 6 or 7 different things.
That was one of the biggest struggles by far.
So you made it through high school. You were a pretty good student in high school. You kind of figured out the game right after I met you. And then transitioning to college, what was your major?
On college, it was jazz studies with emphasis on the drum set.
I think that's the first time we received that response. But jazz studies. And so how did you do your first year of college?
It wasn't good.
Wasn't good? How come?
Honestly, my idea, I don't know what it was, but I just had this idea of college where I could kind of relax a little bit, which was the exact opposite of what I should have been doing. And, first time away from home, living completely on my own, in a dormitory. And I wasn't used to that kind of freedom. Another thing too, and I don't want to use this as an excuse, but I was also the oldest, so I didn't have any older sibling examples to look at and use as like a guideway for how to do things. But I just kind of dropped the ball the freshman year, and I just didn't focus on what I needed to. That category between priority and desire kind of came back from like its elementary school era.
Well, it's that lack of structure. When I knew you, you had the mental trap that so many people in the creative world fall into. And that's, I'm creative, I don't need structure. A lightning bolt of creativity is going to hit me any second now. But I am creative, I don't need any structure. And we kind of fell into that mental trap, it sounds like, your freshman year.
Yeah.
Did you turn it around?
I did turn it around. That required a lot of reflection, which is something I'm not good at. I'll be the first to admit it. But that was one of those big picture moments where I had to take a step back and look at everything that went wrong and why, the simplest reasons why that was. Lack of structure, instant gratification, all the typical things of the creative side. But the biggest thing I think that turned it around for me was, well, first of all, it was quite a commitment on my family's part. So I had to go through with my commitment and be responsible and make sure that academically I was progressing. And, graduation is the ultimate goal, and I need to make sure I got there. Sophomore year is when I came here, I believe.
Yeah, I worked with you again sophomore year.
Yeah.
And we re-implemented that structure.
Yeah.
Right? When I worked with you, it was like office hours are non-negotiable. And you try to make them negotiable, and they became a non-negotiable. Because that's what disciplined all these creative thoughts.
Yeah.
You have these really, really cool thoughts, but they're kind of everywhere. And it's like, when people think about disorganization, ADHD, they think about like my backpack's disorganized or my room is a mess. But they don't think about the thoughts piece. Once you had those structures built in and organized your thoughts, things got better pretty quickly.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even now, the way I'm talking right now, back in elementary school, just a few sentences could take 10 minutes for me. It's like navigating the LA suburbs. It's impossible.
It's funny you say that. My first presentation I ever gave at Untapped, I thought I crushed it. And a parent came up to me after, they're like, what was that?
Really?
They're like, what was that? Because in my head, it made perfect sense, but it was everywhere and no one else could follow it, right? So I completely get that. So you made it through college, graduated, you did really, really well. And then you thought originally you're going to go out to Los Angeles or New York or Atlanta or wherever to just become a jazz musician. And you decided against that in the short term, right out of college. What was the thought process there, and what are you doing now?
The thought process there was, I have some things I need to do back home before I head out there. Of course, money's a big factor, but also I need to extend my resume, make it a little larger, specifically in my focus areas, which is music and film. So instead of going to one of the big cities, I decided to do the musician cruise ship thing. I worked at Carnival Cruise Line. It's one of the nice things about that is it forces you to live and breathe music for the most part. So you get very good at developing your work ethic, which in turn will help you for later endeavors. For me personally, that'll be getting out into a big music market, either the East or West Coast. And it also is a great way to make money in the meantime, doing something you love. It gives you a bit of time to just develop your overall character.
Yeah, it was a really cool thought process by you and your family to think, okay, I graduated college, I'm 22 years old, I'm going to spend 2 or 3 years as a professional musician on a cruise ship or whatever that is with a ton of structure. And then I'm going to go out to LA, Atlanta, New York, and be a musician at 25, but I'll have that structure and I will have been forced to almost be practicing 10 to 12 hours a day.
Yeah, I mean, at the time it just made the most sense.
I still think it makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great thought process. And I've never heard that for people with ADHD, building in the structure before you go to the big city day one by yourself.
Yeah.
It's a great idea. I love that. If you were to go back actually and talk to middle school Jack, the Jack that I met, when I said you need structure, you would have said, I'm creative. I don't need structure. Creativity and structure, oil and water, right? They don't mix. What would you say to that?
I would say understand that being creative isn't an excuse to completely ignore the need for structure. Those two go hand in hand. Structure complements your creative side and vice versa. It took me a long time to put that together, very long, and it cost me a lot of opportunities actually. But the nice thing about that is that you don't take it for granted after you realize the worth of it.
Well, I would argue it hasn't cost you any opportunities yet because you're 22 years old. So
I'm too old.
Yeah, you got a long way to go on this path. When you look at the most creative people of all time, the Picassos, the Da Vinci's, whatever, you read their biographies, they have so much structure weaved into their life. They're in their studio from noon to 8 every single day. And within that, creativity flourishes. Because we're not using all this mental energy figuring out when to get started. You just set clear boundaries for yourself and creativity flourishes. Is that a fair statement?
I believe that's true for most anyone who's in the entertainment business. I got a lot of friends who still got this huge problem. Their brain is saying that I want something right now. It needs to be right now. Like want and need become blurred. And I'd say distinguishing that is probably the best thing you can do for yourself, especially at a young adult age. Just understand, specifically if you're going into a creative field, understand what is it that will get you your best chance to be successful in that field, because the creative entertainment fields are very competitive. Unlike engineering or agriculture, it's not an exact science, it's very subjective. So there's like a lot of unwritten rules that you need to learn, but that comes with time. Yeah.
Oh man. Jack, thanks so much for taking the time. Thanks. Super good for it.